So let's dive into today's episode. No swimming, pun intended. The real problem students and parents face in the system is that they're unsure of where to begin. You know, the students' confidence is degrading. They're avoiding doing work. They're saying they don't like school anymore. They're dreading going to school. And then the report cards are slowly starting to slip and the students feeling overwhelmed and the stress is building. And so today's episode, we're going to dive right into the very seed and the beginning and the start line of the marathon of transformation that I'd like to say. So we're going to unpack some stories of how we've learnt this over the years, working with thousands of students, and then we're going to dive into some psychological frameworks and systems that we use that you can take away and use yourself with your children to be able to figure out where to begin and start on their journey. Now, when we talk about the beginning of the transformation journey, it's essentially the hardest part of the entire journey. And it's very analogous. I think this is what I love about school. School is about learning how to learn and learning how to have a platform and an opportunity to improve and succeed and being able to take that same concept into other areas of life. And what I learned was my transformation journey through school was no different to the transformation journey of building a business from just myself to 300 employees around the country. And it was also no different to how I became one of the best swimmers in the world for my age years ago when I was younger. And so it's a worthwhile skill and process to understand. And this is where I think the magic of school comes in, is if you can learn this at that age, it sets you up for the rest of life because it teaches you how to learn and how to overcome and how to move forward in the real world, which essentially prepares you for any environment and any problem essentially that comes your way. So the best way to envision it is a student is at this point in time and they want to get to here. And so the gap is the difference between that. And when they're here, they have their certain identity over who they are, where they're comfortable. And the concept and thought of trying to jump to this gap, like let's use a C to A example, for instance, but this could be equally as an underconfident student to a super confident student, or a student who doesn't love school to love school. Essentially, the chasm in the middle is the marathon and the journey that is a roller coaster that we're going to go on. And it begins with reshaping the confidence of the student. It's the seat and engine room of everything there. The hardest part about this is that it requires two things. First of all, it requires developing the bravery and courage and optimism to A, believe that it's possible, and then B, take the courage to begin on that journey, because it's fraught with failure. That's where all the gems and the success is learnt along the way. And what comes with that is people that might doubt you, that will laugh at you, that will think that you're a joke. And these are all things that I went through in that process. And sometimes it requires changing the friendship circle that you have, because the way that they're thinking keeps you in that space. So that's the first thing that needs to happen is that level of bravery. And I think bravery and courage isn't something that you're just born with or that's there. It's having anxiety and being scared, but moving forward anyway. And that is what defines that bravery piece. The second piece of it is becoming so uncomfortable that you cannot accept the position that you're actually in, whether that is that you know you can do more and you're frustrated and it's time to change, or whether that's like with me, a genuine fear of like, what's going to happen in 10 years? Where am I going to end up? And so when those two things come together, you create the ingredients and the fuel that begins the process of being uncomfortable where you're at, and then beginning to have that courage and optimism to take that first step to begin on that journey. And you can see how that process is the same process that you'll go through in any parts of life. And it's difficult. How do you do this with a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old who's in that school space? And we'll dive in a little bit more about that, because that's the finesse and art of what we've been obsessed with for 15 years to figure out how to systematize this. So the seed of everything begins at that place, and we need to light that spark and begin that process. So jumping back a bit in building the flywheel of transformation, there is a fantastic education model out there called the Taxonomy of Educational Objectives by a professional called Robert Marzano. It is the same model that underpins our entire program, that underpins ATAR and a lot of the Australian curriculum. And it perfectly describes the learning process that humans go through. So in essence, it's got three core stages: the mindset stage, the metacognitive stage, and the cognitive stage. Now, today we're going to talk about that first stage, because that's where 9 out of 10 students we work with are getting lost in that first stage. And where a lot of schools go wrong, where a lot of parents go wrong, is they try to start lower down the chain. They don't know where to start and where to begin. So essentially the model says that for a human to learn anything, they will ask themselves, the first question is, do I believe I have the ability to learn this? And this is where we lose a lot of students. This is why I lost that student who believed that she was a C student and couldn't attempt the A questions. She's checking out as a no straight away. So at this point, we're not even beginning the learning process. It's like, no, I don't think I can learn it, so I'm not going to attempt it. Now, once you get a yes there, you move into the next stage, which is, do I need to learn this? And this is where motivation and engagement comes in as the second part of this process, which we're going to talk about in another episode. So today we're going to dive into that first stage of the model in terms of how do we get a student, or how do we as humans get to that, yes, I have the ability to learn this, to be able to move forward. For me, that was a fascinating time. I remember I was in grade 9. I'd just come back from the national championships where I got a silver medal. And I remember it wasn't something that just happened in a day. I didn't just rock up one day and go all of a sudden, right, I'm going to become an A student. It was something that I thought about for weeks in a row. And eventually it started becoming more and more frustrating, because I would be like, why can't I do this? I can see my friends getting better grades. Like, why can't I do this? I need to do this. And then it started transforming into, what happens if I don't do this? Do I just keep getting DC grades? Am I going to lose my sports scholarship that I was on? And what's going to happen with my life? Like, I wanted to do something, after achieving something so big in swimming, I wanted to have something remarkable to strive towards in my life. And at this stage, I was setting myself up for failure. So there was this deep unacceptability that what I was doing wasn't going to cut it anymore. And if I kept going down this path, who knows where I would end up. So once I got to that point, I remember this moment where I went, I want to do this. Oh no, I can't do this. I'm not academic. Like, I got ADD. How am I going to focus in class? And I'll talk myself out of it. Then 3 days later, I'd be like, no, I really want to do this. And then I would, a day later, talk myself out of it again. It was this yo-yo of in and out and in and out. And then I eventually got so uncomfortable and got to a point that I said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to become an A student. And I don't care how long it takes. I'm just going to begin. And I wanted to commit to that. And I found in life, I've been able to perform my best when I put myself in a corner and I have no option but to figure it out and succeed. And so the first thing I did was I went back into every single class and I went up to each of my teachers who would have viewed me as a bit of the class clown. And I said, I'm going to get an A this term. You're going to show me how to, and we're going to do this. And that was one of the scariest conversations that I had, because I thought I would get laughed at. I thought that they would talk me out of it. But I was fortunate that every teacher I spoke to was like, right, let's do it. Like, come see me at lunchtime. Come do this. Let's move you up the front of the class. And I had these mentors essentially that bought into the journey, that helped me overcome that first step. And so what happened from there was I also had my parents, my mum in particular, that she had a childhood where she didn't believe in herself and she got some of the worst grades in school, and then ended up going to university way later in life and completing her psychology degree with honors and getting high distinctions. And so she had this transformation of going, oh, like, you can do well in academics, and I am intelligent. And she would talk about that story all the time. And so when I didn't get the good grades, she'd be sitting there going, I know you can do it. I figured it out. You can do it. And she was just unrelenting and being that hero to push me over the line. We'd go to awards nights and she's like, I know you can get up there. Let's see if you can do it next year. And there was one year in particular where I wanted to please my parents so bad that I told them I'd won an award. And then I was like, oh, no. So I didn't win one. And the whole way up, my parents are saying how proud they are. They're so excited for this award. And then they're sitting there in the audience. And I never got called up. And it was one of the most embarrassing things ever. And I thought I was going to get in so much trouble. And no one spoke on the car ride home. And my mum was teary. And she just said, I just feel sorry for you. Like, I know how badly you want this. And she wasn't mad at all. And she was like, let's do it. Let's do it next year. And she just never gave up no matter what. And so after I'd engaged all of my teachers, I had one particular teacher, a guy called Mr. Reed, who was he was a cracker. And he just like went to a whole nother level. He would be like, okay, by tomorrow I want you to do this. And then I would do it. Then he would challenge me more. And then he would challenge me more. And then I found it wasn't long before I was filling out 20, 30 pages a week of summary notes just to get his validation. And I remember getting to a certain point where I'd gone from the lower end of his class to the top, where he actually said, Hayden, I'm going to nominate you for an effort award at the end of the year. And it was the first time, because I'd been wanting to get one of those awards so bad after my parents put a halo around it, that I felt that I had a teacher that truly believed in every part of me. And he's a teacher that was that original external hero that believed in me, that began the transformation. And I started thinking, I can do more than this. And he was consistent and he never gave up. And years and years later, after working with thousands of students, I found a particular science in 2015. It's called the Pygmalion Effect. And essentially what it is, it's a psychological phenomenon when higher expectations lead to improved performance. So in essence, when a teacher believes in a student, that student starts going, maybe I can do this. If they're saying I can do this, maybe I can. So the student puts that little bit more effort in. Then they put that little bit more effort in again. And then all of a sudden, that extra effort leads to a result. For me, that was a bunch of small light bulb moments that then became a C+ instead of a C. And then the teacher was like, I know you can do it. Like, next term, let's see what else you can do. What else can you do differently? And then the next term, I would try that little bit harder and that little bit harder, and then I would get the better result. And then my belief started changing. And then all of a sudden I was like, I'm a B student, but then what would it take to get an A? And then I would do the extra work for that. Then the result would come and it would get reinforced by this teacher. And that is a perfect example of the Pygmalion effect in a positive sense of, like, this teacher believed in me before I believed in myself. And it began the entire flywheel, and it just got faster and faster over time before I got to the point where I was an A student. And that teacher could sit back and go, see, I knew it. I've worked with so many students. I knew you had what it took. Now, the problem we have, and the problem I see, is that happens, that's the rare occasion. What happens far more often in the school system is we've got 30 students in a classroom and one teacher. And there's a natural optimism bias. There's a natural bias that humans have, where there might be a new student in the class who, even just by their name or what they look like, reminds the teacher of a prior student in prior years that was difficult. And that teacher instantly just goes, I'm going to spend less time with them. And it might be purely subconscious. So then the student goes, well, the teacher doesn't invest in me. Maybe I'm nothing special, so I'm not really going to give it a go. So then that student doesn't engage as much. It might just be a slight disengagement initially that becomes larger over time, and then they do less work, they put more effort in, they don't like the subject as much. And then all of a sudden they get a bad result, and that teacher goes, see, I knew that they would like that. And then the student believes that, and you get this negative flywheel where you go the other way. And what I find is that with so many of our students we begin with, and I literally mean like 90% of the students we begin with, they've had a teacher or a multiple of teachers or a coach or a parent or somebody that has built that negative Pygmalion effect, and we're unraveling that. The challenge too, and why I always say to parents we're speaking about, is do something about this quickly, because the longer this happens, the deeper the character and the personality that forms around the student is, and the harder it is to undo. And that's even a scientific fact, is that up until 14, our brain is very plastic. So the speed and ability to get improvements and transformations with primary school students is much, much, much faster than high school students. Because after 14, year 9-ish, the brain starts to solidify and habits start to fall in place. And then you've also got the content going up and the overwhelm goes up, and then the student's in survival mode. And then the closer they get to 25, the longer and harder it is to break those habits. And then at 25, who you are at that point is who you are. That's when your brain completely solidifies and your personality is shaped. So understanding that, it's critical to act on this stuff quickly and be the person that believes in the student before somebody else does. And it takes one hero, that doesn't give up to do that. But that's the biggest thing I've learned through this, is that every transformation began with somebody who believed in the student before the student believed in themselves. And then eventually the student believed in themselves. And that was the beginning of the entire process. Now, it's those little light bulb moments that build confidence. With confidence, it's what I've learned over the years is it's not something that you can just fake. Like this whole stand in front of the mirror and go, I'm a high performer, I'm a great student, I'm intelligent. Your brain doesn't work that way. You can't trick your brain. The only way to build confidence is by volume stacking those small wins. And sometimes it's literally as small as being able to answer a homework question correctly, and it begins that way. And then you stack those, and then they eventually evolve to a C to a C+, which then evolves to getting an A on an assignment. And then the student's like, whoa, I got my first A. And then that triggers the journey into going from a B to an A on exams. And then that's applicable across the entire the entire world. You see that with team members when they start new jobs, and I feel like it's my role to believe in them before they believe in themselves and begin that flywheel. So when working with your child, it's like, how do I get any kind of small win? And Jordan Peterson says this perfectly with his comment on just make your bed. Now, the whole underlying concept of that is that one thing of making your bed is that one little win. It's something easy to do. There's a low inertia. It's easy to achieve. And sometimes it's just making your bed every day that is the beginning of that little win that compounds and compounds and compounds until essentially you're achieving bigger and bigger things. And it's very much everything in life, and the magic in life is compounding. It's that hockey stick growth. And you see it in a lot of things. You see it in the rapid acceleration of athletes, in businesses, in students transforming. It's very slow at the start, and there's small wins, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it takes off. So that's how confidence begins, and it is the beginning of it. Now, I want to talk a bit about a student who's coming up on our Limitless Files that I worked with in 2012, one of the most powerful examples, I think, of confidence and the transformation of that in a compounding way. This student, his name was Tom. I remember his mum called me, and he was on D's for physics and Math B, which was the high math then. And his mum called me, and she said, look, he's getting D's for physics and Math B, and we just want him to pass. He wants to be a mechanic, and can you help? And so this was one of my first students, and I just had 4 other students I'd gotten to A. So I was in a place, but this was also the first male student that I'd worked with. And so I remember rocking up to Tom's house, and the first thing I saw was he was remodeling a jet ski at the front of his house, and then essentially saying, well, if I can do this, I'll be able to make it go this much faster and potentially sell it for more. And straight away I was like, this kid switched on. What's going on here? And as we dove in, he just basically was like, yeah, I'm a DC student. Like, I'm just trying to get through. That's just who I am. I don't really know where else to go from there. And I began telling him my story and going, well, if I went from D's to A's, you can do it too. And we went through the frameworks and everything we do. And I'll talk about that more in a later episode. But essentially, I saw him start to get those little wins on just covering homework. And then all of a sudden, we had this big assignment we worked on for a term. And I remember saying, your challenge is to break the world record to hand in the most drafts that anyone's ever handed in. And I swear he handed in about 20 drafts to the point where the teacher was like, I said, I want your teacher to say, stop giving me drafts. Like, I can't give you any more feedback. And we literally got to that point. And he got an A+ on that exam. It was a big EEI, which is one of the big ones for that year. And it was so good. It got sent to the Queensland board as like an example of one of the best assignments in Queensland. And he won a lot of accolades and awards for this. And at this point, he was still getting D's on his exams. And so this was like the transformational moment where a lot of these little wins, as we went through building this assignment, doing his homework, just went bang. And I remember sitting back and going, okay, we've got an A for an assignment. That's the easy part. How do we get there on an exam? And I'd never seen such a change in motivation, because the thing is, the confidence is the beginning. And when the confidence is there, students love what they think they're good at. Humans love what they think they're good at. That's where passion comes from. And all of a sudden, the motivation just exponentially amplified. And this student was doing hours and hours of summarizing and notes and bringing them to me. And all of a sudden, I was collaborating with a different human being. And it took 6 months, and then he got his first A on an exam. And he ended up finishing on A's for those subjects from D's. And the trajectory of his life is very, very different now. He's exceptionally successful and far beyond where he thought he was going to be. But it was an example of how these small compounding wins became bigger wins, and it rapidly took off and accelerated. And it all began with confidence. So the main things that I want you to take away from today is, after working with so many students, to have that clarity that the starting line of the marathon of the transformation begins with confidence and self-identity. What's fascinating about it too is we did a whole heap of work on a new product that we brought into our service called the grade predictor. Essentially, we used the Marzano model to understand the different weightings that the different learning dimensions had on the projected result of the student. And I always thought that the student's knowledge ability, or their ability to analyze problems, would be the better predictor of the grade outcome. But what we actually found through looking at the meta-analysis of all the dimensions was that confidence had 2 times the weighting in being able to accurately predict a student's result than any other learning dimension. And that was fascinating to see, because it was absolutely not what I was expecting. But then when you think about it, when you can't fake confidence in something that's real, that is earned, it makes sense because the confidence is the perception of what you can achieve. And I think the confidence of the student and the identity of the student sets the glass and the limit of what is possible and what can be achieved. And so a student that's done the work, that believes in themselves, is going to have a higher confidence, and there's a high likelihood they're going to get a better grade. And so knowing that confidence is not only the beginning of the race, but the most powerful predictor of the success, and where a lot of the effort and time needs to be. And how do we do that? Well, understanding the Pygmalion Effect. It's about believing in our students before they believe in themselves, whether that's you as a parent, whether that is the teacher, whether that is a tutor or an academic personal trainer. It's like, that's our job. That's what I see as the magic, is we always begin with the unwavering belief that any student can do it, and we will believe in them before they believe in themselves. And I go, why? Well, I went from these days that if I can do it as a kid with ADHD, that's nothing special, then any kid can too. So that's the takeaways from today. In the next episode, we're going to dive into the next step, which is motivation, and how motivation and engagement begins off the back of confidence. Thanks so much for today, guys, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the next episode.